Let's see. Where was I? Oh, yeah, Proverbs 29. There's a lot in this chapter about the widespread effects of foolishness and wisdom, especially how the behavior of a fool will affect a family, the family's future, and even the whole nation. So I put that subtitle of collateral damage. Start at verse 1. He who is often reproved yet stiffens his neck will suddenly be broken beyond healing. What kind of person is often reproved? Except that somebody who makes a lot of mistakes and doesn't listen or doesn't learn from those mistakes. Keep telling them you're doing this wrong, and they keep doing that wrong. And I
Well,
suppose
it's not just that they keep doing it wrong. They prefer to do it wrong because it says they stiffen their neck. Therefore, there's a pride thing there because they're not open to instruction. I think that's a key component to this. Not that they've done it wrong. You can have somebody that just doesn't have an understanding or there's a disconnect. But if you have somebody that, no, I know better and I'm going to do it my way, at some point, there's a revelation that their way is not right, and that's a difficult thing for somebody to hear sometimes.
Yeah, especially when you're certain that you already know what's right. And clearly somebody who is stiffening his neck doesn't believe what the other person is telling them, or whether it's scripture or their conscience or whatever it is. They don't believe that the consequences are actually going to happen. And if you keep down the same path that you're on and you don't find those negative consequences, that just reinforces that belief until suddenly everything catches up with you all at once. I think there's a connection here between the idea of stiffening the neck and the sudden breaking also. If you think about a dry twig, when you put it under pressure, breaks suddenly, but a green twig bends under pressure. If you cut a twig off of a tree, it's green at first and it'll bend under pressure, but the longer it stays disconnected, the drier it gets until suddenly it breaks. And, the remedy there is to graft it back into the tree or into a different tree.
And the ironic thing is the individual that's doing the reproving, these are Proverbs are to the kings, correct? Mostly advice to kings.
Mostly
is that
to rulers in general, yeah.
So if you have a ruler that cares enough to reprove, that's a kindness. But at some point, that ruler's patience is going to get tested and he will have had enough. So if you use this in terms of Yahweh, if Yahweh is gracious enough to allow us to be taught over and over again, I don't want to be the person that is there when he snaps, when he's had enough. Okay, you're done. That's not a good broker.
Yeah, and the reproof doesn't have to be harsh, at least not at first. And just like those 6 stages of rebuke that Israel is promised at the end of Deuteronomy, it starts out that's bad, but they don't take the correction, and the next time gets worse, and then it gets worse. And if just on a person-to-person level, if you have to correct somebody, it doesn't have to be you're wrong and you need to fix this, because that's usually not going to go over well. People aren't going to accept that. But reproof on a personal level can be as simple as asking questions like, what's going to happen if you do that? Or, have you thought about doing this other thing? And that people will tend to listen to that sooner than they'll listen to a harsh rebuke. But eventually, you're right. I mean, especially with somebody who's in charge, who has authority, eventually they have to get harsh. All right, so let's move on to verse 2. When the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. As we've said many times, the Proverbs are more about principles than promises. And you can tell, like, in a wicked society, the people groan when the righteous are in charge. But that almost never happens. In a wicked society, you usually have wicked rulers. You have to have a righteous society in order to have righteous rulers most of the time. The Bible has occasional exceptions, like when Josiah comes into power after generations of wicked rulers, and he tries to fix everything. He makes a lot of progress, but it's not enough. The Proverbs we've read a lot of stuff about, righteous rulers and versus wicked rulers. But actually, this verse it's not talking about necessarily righteous rulers here. It says when the righteous increase, which can refer to righteous people being promoted and so that they are in charge. It can also be righteous people prospering, like increasing what they own or hold. And I think the effect is the same. When righteous people are at the top of their fields, everybody around them is prospering too. They're treating people fairly. They're doing business honestly, and everybody's happier. Everything is running smoother, except the wicked people who don't want things to run smooth.
Conceptually, I get it. I just have not witnessed it.
Yeah,
sad to say. Society is like, whoa, I have not really seen it.
Yeah, and as you can see, I mean, we have had generations of wicked people in charge and wicked people prospering, and civil unrest just keeps getting worse. And from that perspective, it proves the last half of this proverb. We just haven't seen the first half yet. The closest we've come, I think, was the Reagan years, and I'm not entirely sure that was the case. I was a little too young and naive to really understand most of that. So,
yeah, I mean, even take it out of politics. If you have a scenario whereby maybe a revival or something, I've not seen revivals that I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but I've had friends that have gone to quote unquote revivals, and I'm questioning, was it real or not? I'm not getting real for them, but I would think that's the closest that I could think of with regards to righteous increasing, but that's to be seen.
Yeah. All right. So verse 3, unless somebody has anything else they want to add there, I'm kind of moving quickly through here. And if you want to speak up, go ahead. All right. So verse 3, he who loves wisdom makes his father glad, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. What story does that remind you of? The companion of prostitutes who squanders his wealth. It reminds me of the prodigal son.
Prodigal son. Yep.
Yeah. And, I did a video a couple of years ago about, honoring your parents, and and one of the responses I got was, well, my parents just aren't honorable. They're horrible people. Like, yeah, that happens. And so I did a follow-up video like, well, how do you honor your parents when they're not honorable people? And I think that this proverb, he who loves wisdom makes his father glad. I know that there are fathers out there who provoke their children and try to get them to misbehave. But I think that even among those kinds of fathers, most of them are secretly very pleased when their children show wisdom and are actually well behaved. It might anger them at some level, just because for the same reason that wicked people get angry at righteous people. It exposes their sin. It shows everybody around them just how bad they are in comparison. But still, this is your children. And even a wicked father, when his children are righteous, will be pleased at some level.
Well, Jay, it's not about the father, it's about the wisdom. Mm-hmm. So wisdom is separate from the father. If the father's advocating and presenting wisdom, great. But if the child is embracing wisdom that's beyond what the father is doing, I think that's a bit of a difference there.
Not really sure I'm following you.
So, okay, you have this evil father. Let's go to Huckleberry Finn, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got the Huckleberry Finn's father, which is a murderer and whatnot. But Huckleberry Finn he's embracing common sense. He's embracing things that are righteous in a sense, as compared to the father. I think that simple fact of his acting appropriate and rightly so, I think that does influence and offset the evilness of that father. Mm-hmm. It's the father basically, I think, rests or can rest in the fact that, okay, he's got a clue, and therefore I can pull back my wrath, if you will.
Yeah, it occurred to me that there is another way to interpret this. I don't think it's really what's intended, but it could be read that if you love wisdom, you will then make your father glad. You will then work to make your father, or you will work to please your father. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Rather than one being, your father will just be pleased with your wisdom prompts you to please your father.
Hmm.
I think either of those is true, as long as your father is pleased by wise behavior, because obviously some of them aren't. All right, if there's nothing else on that one, verse 4. Oh, well, we're probably not going to have time to go through all of these. Actually, there's one. I wanted to mention something about verses 5 and 6. And there is something special about these two verses. And what do you suppose that might be? There's a chiasm. Yeah, there is. There's a chiasm there. And it's more apparent if you take a very literal translation, like Young's literal or something like that. But, the top part, a mighty man, the word for man in this verse is geber, which literally means a warrior or a mighty man. So a mighty man who flatters his neighbor is juxtaposed with a righteous man who sings and rejoices. Both of them are saying something. One is praising his neighbor. The other is presumably praising God. But the first one is giving false praise. And the last one is giving true praise. And the consequence is that a net is spread and an evil man is ensnared. And in the center, the net is spread for his feet, and the ensnarement is in his transgression. And consider the idea of transgression is something where you have crossed a boundary. And the idea that you have walked somewhere or gone somewhere that you shouldn't have gone, and now you are ensnared. So in both of those, for his feet and his transgression have to do with going somewhere where you're not supposed to be. Anyways, it's not a super profound chiasm, but I thought it was still interesting, worth pointing out.
How would you define flattery?
False praise, giving somebody compliments in order to get something out of them rather than actually telling them something useful.
But I think I've heard it maybe in movies, saying it in a positive manner. Like somebody will say something and the lady will be like, "Oh, you flatter me."
Yeah, that's like a humble brag, saying, "Oh, you're just giving me false praise. You don't really mean that." But when, of course, they're saying, "Oh, yes, I am that. I'm all that."
If flattering is falsely giving somebody praise, what would be another way to, I guess praise, right? Would be the opposite of that.
Yeah, complimenting, praising.
Yeah, because I think the scripture says, I think I was reading it somewhere, I think in Romans, because I'm reading Romans right now, and it said that not to get tired of like praising each other or something like that. Yeah. Which I think it's good, but I think that we live in such a world that I don't know, it's hard to believe what anybody's saying, that if you praise somebody, like at work, for example, I'm very careful of not over praising people, because they may think that I'm just flattering somebody because I'm trying to move ahead, something like that. So that praise can come as flattery and come and bite me later on. So I measure what I say about people, because they might take it the wrong way.
Yeah, Paula and I were actually talking earlier today about when rewards are given too frequently, how they lose their potency. And, we were specifically talking about that in the context of graduations. Everybody's got their kindergarten graduation and their 5th grade graduation.
Like as a trophy.
There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But if those kind of things come too often, then they just lose their meaning.
Yep, I agree.
And it is good to tell people when they're doing something right, as long as you don't make too big of a deal of it and gush over minor things. Like, if your kid does something right, good job. You should tell them. If it's not something like they did a great job of walking across the room without falling down, they don't need to be complimented for that.
We clap for that. We clap for that.
if it's their first steps, yeah, clap and cheer, sure. But you know, if they've been walking successfully for many years, no need to compliment them anymore. We can move on to something bigger.
Yeah. Now I've seen babies that it comes to a point where there's so much of that every time they do something that is not even significant, they look at you and they start clapping.
Yeah.
They're like, "Hey, I just did something. It was nothing great, but I did something." And everybody else like groans. They're just like, "Yeah." But you know, when I see that, I'm like, "No." I don't say anything, but I'm like, "No, you guys are doing this all completely wrong. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Don't now you're really flattering somebody for sure instead of praising them, you know." But at the same time, it's also not good to tell everybody all the time when they're doing something wrong, you know, because
Yep.
it may be something small. And if you constantly are nagging somebody about that, it's just at some point it becomes one of those things where you what if what they're doing wrong is it just a mistake? Is it just, you know, learning curve? Or is it straight up just being a scoffer? If it's a learning curve or something like that, a small mistake, then yeah, you shouldn't be nagging people all the time about stuff like that. And then once you know that they're just complete scoffers, you just let it go. Even if they don't think they're being stiff-necked, you just drop it. And honestly, I'm a happier person once I realize that person has decided just to be a scoffer and doesn't want to hear it. I'm just like, okay, fine. You leave them up to their own devices, you know, you're like, okay, no problem. And you're a happy person and they're a happy person. Hopefully you can just pray for them and they'll revert back. But if not, it's better let it go.
Well, you also lose focus. Like, have you ever seen a football game where a team is being crushed and somebody makes a good play, losing, and they make this big exaggerated, "I'm the best, look at me, I made a tackle," or whatever the play is. Well, you're totally out of context in that situation, and you've lost focus as to what your ultimate goal is. So flattery kind of doesn't really matter what's going on. I'm deserving of praise regardless, you know.
Hey Jay, I can't remember the address. There's a verse. There's a New Testament, quote unquote, New Testament verse where it talks about it's a wicked servant who just does the minimum, and that doesn't. There's no glory there, and that could be where that would. That's kind of what you guys are talking about, but it talks about that if you're just doing the basic. People that think they're doing all that because they're, you know, obeying the commandments, and it's kind of a warning to any of us who quote unquote are Torah keepers, is that it's not about ticking boxes in order to get flattery or gain favor, because that's expected. It's the house norm, shall extend, act, you know, etc., like that stuff.
Yeah, I don't remember what verse that is either. I mean, I know which one you're talking about, where it says that, you know, if a servant only does what's required of him, why should he expect any kind of praise for that? Yeah, I think
no rejoicing.
a lot of this really depends on the person you're dealing with too. I mean, some people, if somebody is continually motivated by praise over small things, then keep praising them over small things. I mean, if that helps them and moves them forward. But if somebody becomes complacent and says, "Oh, I guess I'm doing pretty good, I don't need to work any harder," then obviously you're praising them too much, or maybe not criticizing them enough. You know, it really depends on the person, which implies that you need to know them. Let's see. One thing, if you're flattering your neighbor, how exactly does this cause a net to be spread for your feet? I mean, how is this a problem? I'm open to suggestions. I mean, I have some ideas, but I'm curious what y'all think.
Yeah, this one stumps me all the time too when I read it. I have difficulty thinking, like, it makes sense that flattering somebody can come and bite you later on.
Well, you're empowering them. You're giving them some sort of hold on you that could turn around and be used against you, I would think.
Maybe you idolizing them too much, and then they're like,
Yeah.
well, you say I'm that, you know, I'm that good, then you know, my next multi-level marketing business that I come across then you need to follow me because hey, you say I'm that good. What's the problem now? So you now you're cornered, right? You're like, man, I've been flattering this guy this whole time, but I just wanted something from him, and now he's asking me for something. So guess I got to give in.
Expectation.
Yeah, expectations.
I like that.
I've experienced this personally, being the person who flattered the other person in the past. I think as a Southerner, we're actually sort of trained to do this kind of stuff.
Bless your heart.
Yeah, we are seriously trained for this. We are trained for this. And mine is kind of mixed with, the Southern and the Cajun culture. So there's a lot of craziness wrapped up in that. But what I learned over time, and it really taught me a lot, is that I've become way more judicious about how I compliment people and also being careful about how much, which is something we've talked about, because sometimes you can encourage people in things when you flatter them that are not really suitable for them. And even sometimes you might flatter someone who you don't particularly enjoy their company or a lot of things. And you might be doing it for maybe what you think is good reasons. And then you'll end up with somebody who like you can't get rid of. And so it's like a false pretense.
Good.
So I think there's a lot of
That's okay.
potential around this kind of stuff that you just have to be judicious about how you do praise people. And I do think, like, I can think of one circumstance recently where I was trying to give praise where it was due for someone who really needs a lot of praise, but really having to be very careful not to go overboard and like having to really walk a really fine line, because I knew that if I praised too much that this person might believe more about their skills and their circumstance than was right. And it can cause a problem because then they start to think more about those things than they should. And there's just a lot of negative side effects of that. So it's just not honest in that way. I'm sorry?
Was it a guy?
It was a guy, but it was a family member.
So one
Well,
way
I'm
of
just saying, guys' egos gets easily lifted. Family
Yes.
member or not, I'm just saying, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially in the culture we live in, because they're so torn down in so many ways by the culture.
I was gonna say that like a manly man would actually feel uncomfortable if a woman praises them too much. Like
Is that what Jay is?
if a woman starts praising me too much, the first thing I'm doing is checking my wallet.
Well, that's a proverb shortly.
Yeah. But
that's a great point.
But Tim is right about that part of it. I've seen it to where that's why I tell, my wife and Avery to listen. Like when me and my wife started dating, I will see that it was her nature to smile back at people all the time. And she has this beautiful pearly whites and so on. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And then guys would like suck that in, and she will come and tell me stories like, yeah, this guy, whatever. And I said, look, I know what's going on. I said, listen, I know this is hard for you to do, but just stop smiling at people. Don't make eye contact with guys. And she's like, well, I'm just trying to be nice. I said, I know, but you understand. Same thing what Tim said, that we men now are so broken. Well, you said that, Paula. Men are so broken that now any little bit of attention, they just got to take it all in. And the point of what I wanted to make earlier, that didn't say I want to make earlier, was that it is so hard now because you know, you have to measure your flattery, your praise, I'm sorry, with everybody. Like I said, I praise somebody and then somebody else may take that as flattery, you know, so it has to be so measured, and it sounds almost exhausting, to be honest with you. So it almost needs to come like few far in between that praise with people, you know, it has to be so little that you don't have to constantly be wondering if your praise can be seen as flattery. We for sure know flattery is no bueno. That everybody here in this group has no, I'm sure has no problem with that. But the praise part that can be seen as flattery is a fine line.
Well, it's almost
Yeah,
sycophant. You know, it's almost like, oh, I'm flattering you. I'm flattering my neighbor. My neighbor loves that flattery. So they seek me out to get more improper flattering or flattery that is going to build their ego up. So you're almost creating this monster that you have to become in order to keep that rapport with them.
Yeah, you got I think two reactions that you're primarily going to get in, you know, on the one hand, if you flatter somebody, you know, it's manipulative. You know, they're going to eat it up and, you know, want to either be clingy or reciprocate or whatever. You're going to get something out of them. But on the other hand, if they don't believe you, you know, whether it's because they're insecure or they see through your flattery, you're going to lose trust and you're going to be breaking that relationship. And either way, you're causing problems for yourself further down the road.
Yep.
All right. So let's move back. Let me bring the Bible back over here. We'll move on to the next verse. Let's see, verse 7. A righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. Here's one that our culture really needs to hear. All the people who are crying the most about the rights of the poor and justice for the poor understand these concepts the least. Those people don't know what justice is. They don't know what righteousness is. So when they're trying to champion justice for the poor, they're actually perverting it. They're accomplishing the opposite. You know, we can see this through government programs that are supposed to help people, you know, the war on poverty and, you know, all these affirmative action in welfare programs and all kinds of stuff that, you know, have great sounding justifications, but in the long run, they cause the problem they're trying to solve. And it's because the people who run these programs, the people who create them and beg for them, don't understand justice. They don't understand what people need because they don't believe what the creator of people tells them about people.
Yeah, I saw I saw in the news today that they're trying to get it gas stoves banned.
Yeah.
And there's, I think maybe I heard wrong. It sounds crazy to me. It says 17
Yeah.
states that are going through the process or something like that, or it's already in place. I hope that sounds so crazy. And I heard about this probably like a year or two ago, and I'm just like, nah. But yeah,
No,
it looks
they're really
like
doing it.
yeah,
And
and
I think New York State has started that, and yeah, now it's catching on other places.
yeah, and I
And
heard
partly because that's going to take power away from states that supply gas. So, you know, Texas and Pennsylvania and other states that may lean a little bit more conservative. Well, that's a way that liberal states can take power away from them by taking out money out of their wallets. But it's also just another way to control people.
no, absolutely. And the crazy thing about it is that it looks like a lot of the celebrity chefs were complaining about it. So
Mhm.
it looks like there's a provision now to where if you have a business or you're a celebrity or something like that, celebrity chef, then you're allowed to cook with a gas stove. But everybody else gets to cook in electric. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
it's nuts.
that's
And
how
that's
it
the
always works.
right, and that's how it is. Like there's somebody up top that has to be smart enough to understand what they're doing, and they're selling that stuff to somebody right at the bottom that really thinks that they're helping out the poor. You
Mhm.
know, but they're not, and since we're talking about Reagan, I think he said something about that, right? What he said, I'm sure you know, right, Jay, better than me. So when the government comes and tells you that they're here to help, that's when
Yeah.
you need to get scared and run away. But we make you make the government a bad people, but it's not. Government's full of like, it's made up of people. So somebody's making those calls to do that, but they think they're high and mighty, and they get flattered too. There's all this flattery going on between each other. Or it's not just one person flattering. Flattery becomes almost a disease. All these people start flattering each other and giving each other awards for stuff that they didn't do. There's presidents that have gotten an award for peace when they've been at war the whole time. I mean,
Yeah.
think about how crazy that sounds. So this world is sick of flattery. Everybody's flattering each other for doing nothing really, and we're just making things worse.
Yep. Yeah. I know that some people will kind of say, well, how does outlawing gas stoves increase the government's control over anybody?
No.
Well, it's not really about what the law is intended to accomplish. That's not where the control comes from. The control comes from having a law that people can violate. And when people are in violation of a law, then you've got power over them. It doesn't even matter what the law is.
Yeah, it's taking away of rights. It's arguing that the government has the ability to determine what is right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it conditions people to accept that.
But it's psychological warfare too. It slowly starts breaking your spirit down that you can't do anything now. I was like, I can't drive here anymore. I can't cook this anymore. I can't even say this anymore. And your spirit really starts just dying to where the society start dying, and you start complying. Anyway, again, of course, but yep.
All right, let's move on. And there's a lot in this chapter that has direct application to our current events.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
There's a dichotomy there. It says a righteous man knows the rights, whereas a wicked man does not understand.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting that it's equating wickedness with a lack of understanding, whereas what we've been talking about, I think there is understanding. It's an overt attempt to secure power, but this actually says a wicked man does not understand the rights of the poor.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I think that's what I was saying, that there's some people all the way to the top that really know.
Yeah.
But somewhere in the middle, they're pulling the strings for the people in the middle, and they don't know. They think, what's the name of that girl that keeps on pushing climate change? The little girl.
Yes.
Greta Thunberg.
Yeah. I dare you. So she was young when she was doing that. She probably had no clue. Somebody watched her, and now wholeheartedly she believes that.
Yeah, she's been flattered into it.
They would equate her to wicked as opposed to a useful idiot. I mean,
exactly. So you have the wicked that really know what they're doing, but then you have the idiots at the bottom, or the fools that are getting played.
But it says a wicked man does not understand such knowledge. So this verse would equate Greta as wicked because she doesn't understand it.
She is wicked. Even if she's again, play like a fool, you're still wicked. I mean, there's people out there thinking that what they're doing is completely fine. You see it all over now, right? Transgression all over, and people, they're still wicked. The Father doesn't. I was telling somebody, that the Sabbath, it is what it is, whether you follow it or not. The Sabbath has always been there from the very beginning, right? Seventh day you shall rest. So nothing's changed. The Father is not, somebody that keeps changing his mind. It is what it is from there. Now, just because you don't know that the Sabbath is righteous and set apart, that doesn't mean that it's not. I mean, it still is, regardless. There's a study that Avery found that people that partake on a Sabbath, that take it really the whole day, live 10 years longer than most people. Okay. Now, I didn't check if it was, I didn't go and look into it in detail, but I was like, let's look for what it is. So there's consequences, whether there's people that have lived and died not knowing about the Sabbath, right? Whether you know it or not, that law, that instruction has always been valid forever, and it still holds no matter what. Just because you don't know doesn't matter, it's still wicked.
Does that word wicked, does that line up with, is that the Jeremiah 17:9, the heart of man is deceitful, desperately wicked, i.e., is wicked somehow Hebrew for unknowing, doing what's right in one's own eyes, blah, blah, blah?
Well, the Hebrew is rasha, which literally means wicked, criminal, guilty. Let's see if it's the same one that's in Jeremiah.
17:9, I believe, 9:10, 8:9.
Okay.
My addresses are hand grenade addresses.
It's close. Let's see, looking up that word desperately. Oh, misspelled it. No wonder why I can't find it. Yeah, 17:9 is the verse.
That's definitely and the ESV
Desperately wicked. No, it's a different word. In this case, it's anash, which really means to be sick.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna go there, guys. Masks. I listened to a sermon on Sunday, and it was on Romans, and it was trying to talk about how they're controversial subjects, and you need to learn how to fellowship regardless of those controversial subjects. And they used it as an example, masks. And I'm thinking, boy, because they're trying to keep their congregation for those that are masked and those that aren't. From my perspective, those that are advocating masks are advocating an evil that, in my mind, is clearly a control mechanism. But they're doing so from their naivete. There was a commercial, I remember when COVID first came out, and it was a grandmother, it was on the radio. And this was a grandmother talking to her daughter. And the grandmother was more or less saying, I've lived a great life. I'm getting the shot because I want to see my grandkids.
Yeah,
I found that to be
manipulation
very
at its best.
Yes, exactly. Very much so. So I think those that are from their heart and they believe they're advocating science, quote unquote, are also advocating control, in my mind. So that would be, in a sense, wicked.
Yeah, something about. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between advocating for it, for saying that everybody should be doing this versus I chose to do this for myself.
Yes.
For my own personal reasons, I chose to do that. Like, I'm personally opposed to, being forced to do anything like that. But I think ultimately, if somebody says, I want to do this and I'm not doing this for anybody else, in terms of like people trying to force me, then that's cool. But I think a lot of people have kind of gotten on the wrong side of that and not just said, hey, look, I want to appease my congregation. I'll just tell them, hey, wear a mask if you want to wear a mask. Don't wear a mask if you don't want to wear a mask. So I think the promotion of it as a you must do mandate is a totally different thing.
Back to something Carlos was saying, he's talking about the people at the top. At least I think that was Carlos, and how the people at the top know what they're doing. And I agree, they do. They know that they are manipulating people and they're lying in order to get people to do what they want. They don't actually care about gas stoves or people wearing masks or guns, whatever it is. They don't care about any of that. They care about controlling people and milking them for whatever they can. But they still don't understand the rights of the poor. And I think that rights is probably a poor translation here. It's really, it's talking about a court case. So rights isn't totally wrong, but it may be like the cause or the plight of the poor in a legal situation. They don't understand it, even though they know that what they're doing is, opposed to God's law and God's standards. They don't really understand God's standards anyways. and they don't care to. They're just trying to get whatever they can for themselves and in their cronies.
I like that word plight. It lends itself to a larger sphere of understanding, the realm of the poor, the day-to-day struggle, etc.
So let's move on to verse 8. So scoffers set a city aflame, but the wise turn away wrath. Well, we know all about scoffers setting cities aflame, and mostly they're scoffing at public order and biblical standards of anything. But I think that, the thing that really makes scoffers are people who mock good order. Essentially, they mock traditions, they mock authority, and people following the rules. And people who are driven by their emotions and people who are fools, they're attracted to that. Whether they're capable of being the clever mocker or not, they're attracted to people who are. Makes them feel good about themselves for rejecting those same standards, even though their reason for rejecting biblical standards may be purely selfish and lazy. Somebody who is a clever scoffer can give them clever justifications. People who refuse to believe in God, the average atheist is generally not very smart. They don't see God in the world around them, so they reject that idea. But then you get somebody really smart like, Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, who comes up with clever sounding reasons to reject God. And those scoffers will latch onto those reasons, even though they don't understand them, because it strokes their ego. It's like saying, yeah, we're right. This really smart guy agrees with us. But, really, they're just lazy, stupid, undisciplined. They're not really all that smart. And if they were that smart, they would be able to see through the silly arguments that atheists and other people come up with for rejecting God's standards.
The mass is often manipulated by pithy little phrases. Politics is full of it, tippy canoe and whatever, all those, or tear down the wall, or, or build the wall, whatever it is, just it's marketing. And, if you have something that is memorable and marketed there's a whole industry built around that, isn't there? So that's basically going to the common denominator, and the something that is going to be easily memorable, and and the masses will embrace that.
Yeah, it makes people easily manipulated.
Because I got the right phrase,
Yeah, in the last half of this proverb, the wise turn away wrath. It takes a lot of wisdom. It's definitely above my pay grade to be able to counteract that sort of, slogan manipulation. If I have time to sit down and have a conversation with somebody, I might be able to explain to them why this political slogan they've latched onto is really kind of silly. But people just don't have time for that. They're not going to sit down and listen to it. So to find somebody, a politician or a judge or, who religious leader, whatever it is, who can steer people away from those things, that would be a really valuable person to have. I would like to see more of them. I don't know if they're out there. Like Ron Paul had a lot of really good things to say, but you had to sit still and listen. Otherwise, nobody paid any attention.
R-O-N or R-A-N-D?
What's that?
The father or the son?
Ron. Well,
Father.
Rand has some good things to say too. It's just not as smart as his dad, I don't think. He's a better politician, probably.
Oh yeah, he is. Anyway, I'll get stuck on that one. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, go to Facebook. It's driven by memes. What are memes? Pithy statements.
Yeah, and mostly mockery.
Mostly mockery, yeah.
Verse 9 goes right along with that and fits in with the meme idea too. If a wise man has an argument with a fool, the fool only rages and laughs, and there is no quiet. There's no arguing with a fool. You can argue with them all day long, and they're still not going to come around to your side.
And they get louder.
Yeah. And they bring others into the fight too. I've found that online, the best response to people like that is to mock them right back or just block them, because you're not going to win the argument. All right. Bloodthirsty men hate one who is blameless and seek the life of the upright. Mostly because I think they expose people's wickedness.
Go to
Why
the Sanhedrin. Go to the Pharisees and Yeshua. Perfect example.
Yeah, Yeshua was constantly exposing people's wickedness. And first, he did it just by his behavior, by showing people what righteous behavior was, and he made them jealous. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were especially upset that the people were following him, and they weren't following them. And so then they had to set traps and come up with a justification to have him executed. Let's see. Verse 11, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back.
I have a hard time with that.
With the idea or
With
holding
not
it back?
I'm a fool sometimes about that sometimes. I've been learning, but I'm over half a century old and I still struggle with that.
Yep, that's a tough one.
I come in hot into the paint.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
That hurt me. I'm just saying that verse physically hurt my guts.
I was actually
Yeah.
talking about this today, how like somebody that I know, I was talking to Jay about this, just how their mouth, like they don't have any ability to like filter or hold themselves back from like saying just almost anything. And it's been a really bad thing for that person. And I look at my own self and see where there's places that it's like a little more compartmentalized, but there are areas where I can still see traces of this still existing. It's hard to wipe out.
Peter had that problem, so I console myself
like it.
sometimes when I come out of my compartment. Say, well,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
Father
true.
Peter did it. I'm sorry.
It goes hand in hand with controlling the tongue, which is
Yeah.
not easy to do.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
Are there any other verses in here that anybody especially wants to talk about?
Verse 15 is an interesting one.
Oh yeah, that's exactly the one that I was going to say. I was going to say 15 through 17 because they're all linked together.
Right.
Yeah, my parents had 6 kids and I was the youngest of the 6. So by the time they got to me, I was pretty much on my own. My siblings, of course, helped raise me, and my parents taught me, a lot of spiritual truths. They brought me up right in that sense, and I went to church at least 3 times a week for most of my life, most of my younger life. But much of the time, I was left to my own devices, and I wasn't a hoodlum or anything. I wasn't getting into a lot of trouble, but I think in a society where most people are already well behaved, letting a child raise himself does limited damage. But that kind of thing snowballs quickly. And if that happens for 2 or 3 generations, then the whole society is in deep trouble. And once you've got a society that is mostly wicked, you cannot let children raise themselves. They need constant attention to guide them from the foolishness that is naturally bound up in the heart of a child into a wise person who can be a responsible and righteous adult. And if they don't, then it's going to be a tough row for that child to row as they get older, or to hoe as they get older.
Yeah.
What are you thinking on this one, Tim?
A couple things. One of them was I did a little bit of church growing up. My mom made me do some stuff, and then there was some really fun Bible school in the summertime vacation Bible school that I would go to because I could take my bike there. There was a neighborhood little white church, and etc. But anyways, so in '96, it quote unquote took, or I got saved. I know it's prolepsis and blah blah blah, but my point is I took it seriously about my sin and forgiveness and beginning that walk, and that was 20 years, and really an excellent dispensational church. So I know that's
Mhm.
a kind of an oxymoron, but you know what I mean, is they're really thorough, right? And almost hyper dispensational, although they denied it. Anyways, they would always use these, you know, when the parenting times came during the messages, they would use this rod and reproof portion to talk about discipline. And they did do some of the intellectual or bring your kid to Bible school or teach your kid Bible verses, but a lot of it was corporal punishment.
Mhm.
Don't be afraid to spank your kids kind of a mentality. And I'm not saying they beat the kids and this and that and the other thing. I'm just saying that the emphasis was more towards the physical, make sure your kids know who's boss thing than I believe, looking at this, than it was your rod and your staff, you know, your commandments, your wisdom, the word of God, teaching your children, building precept on precept and showing them why you do what you do, etc. You build that interactive relationship with them, so they start getting their own traction, their own soil starts getting turned over little by little. And I just think it's looking across the sea of gatherings and congregations out there that really are missing the breadth of this, including me and my 5 kids. I mean, I was raising them under, well, we did march a little bit different, but the drumbeat there was more authoritative discipline versus
Mhm.
spiritual word of truth, light on the path, word of God discipline.
Mhm.
And then my other thought was, isn't it, when I look at all these Proverbs and it talks about my son and this and that and the wisdom and stuff, and the rod and reproof gives wisdom, but a child unrestrained brings shame, etc., to his mother. And then of course Proverbs 8 talks about the mother being the spirit and everything. But anyways, it, in a bigger sense, it reminds me that this is all kind of a overlook of the nation of Israel when they did not take the reproof of the word as an entire nation of stiff-necked children, which someone mentioned earlier about the stiff neck and that. And then just kind of goes on to that and leading to the scattering of the tribes. And now Yeshua comes for his lost sheep and he's bringing them in with his rod and his staff of a comfort, you know, all this other stuff. And so it kind of reminds me of he's gathering his children again to grow them up into the covenant relationship with the bride and everything. But anyways, so those are the things that kind of hit me when I was looking at that.
Mhm.
That's really good.
Good. That last part, you know, discipline your son and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. I gave,
Yes.
you know, in the kind of culture where the extended family lives in the same area, you work the same land generation after generation, and, you know, in all cultures really, but especially in that kind of agrarian society, you teach your children well when they're young, and they're going to take care of you when you're older. If you don't teach them well when they're young, there may not be anybody to take care of you. And there's no retirement. You work the land or you die. So if you don't have well-behaved children who are going to be responsible and work the land and provide for you when you're old, you could be in some serious trouble. And, you know, that's less so today, but it's still the same principle is in effect. You know, if your children are, if you don't raise them right when they're young, and then when you get older, they may not necessarily be in prison, but, you know, they're going to be in debt, they're going to be irresponsible, they're not going to be following your traditions. It's going to be just one heartbreak after another. And unfortunately, it's just, our culture doesn't help either, because our school system, our entertainment, the you know, politics, everything is against you. It's tough.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a good point you made, and that's a conversation I've been having a lot lately, where when you read the scriptures, you almost have to put yourself back like you just did, and at that time, like you said, work the land, and if your kids don't work the land, you starve to death. So it's difficult, but you can be done with some practice if you just put yourself in that culture and why these things are written. But they still relate to now, because
Mhm.
we are in 2024 and are we in 2023? Whew. In Eastern cultures, the same way. There's still people from Mexico and below, and somewhere in the Eastern Bloc and Middle East and Africa, where that's still the case. You're dependent on your children to to carry it on for you when you get older. I mean, in China, in rural China, the parents are expecting their kids to take care of them when they get old. It's no conversation about, well, we're going to move down to Mexico and retire there and you can come visit us whenever you can. No, it's like literally there's that. And now, since they had the one child thing for a while, parents are really nervous now because they can't marry their son,
Yeah.
because there's nobody to marry. And so now you're seeing an influx of other Asian countries that are poorer than China, and they're sending the girls over there so they can marry a Chinese man, so they can procreate and have kids because they got to keep the farm going.
Yeah. China's exporting a lot of their men too.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. There's big trouble there, and that's one of the things China has a problem. They miscounted by 100 million. I don't know if it's true or not. That's a problem for China. That I forgot the guy's name. Yeah, he's a Chinese American. He wrote a book and talked about it, that China wasn't going to be around for a while, and it's because of that they haven't been able to maintain that. But it's sad that they've lost that culture of family, like they did before, and that's what communism does. That's one of the goals of communism, is to destroy the family structure in order for you to understand that your children belong to the state and they don't belong to you.
Sounds like America too.
Yep.
Yeah, America is certainly trying to follow China's path on that.
Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing because China has obviously sabotaged their future. In China, Japan, a lot of these countries, they're facing an imminent demographic collapse, and it's going to be a big disaster. And the people at the top in the United States want to do the same thing. Well, this doesn't make any sense.
Is important because it's putting the onus upon the parent, not the state, but the parent. And if you read this, you must realize parenting is not leaving your kids to the TV. It's trying to show them and demonstrate to them what is righteous, what is right and wrong. Then you'll be happy. You'll be proud. They will bring you joy, because it's a reflection on you. If you parented correctly, and I wish I'm proud of my kids and such. They're not following the Lord as I'd hoped. So I thought I'd parented correctly, but there was a disconnect in some levels. But they still bring me joy and they bring me peace. So at least there's that element. But it rests upon me. The failure was on my part, not on theirs. It's a key focus, I think.
Verse 18 ties a lot of that stuff we were talking about.
Yeah.
All the way from the child to even the Israel thing is though he understood. Yeah, where there is no vision, the people are let loose. But blessed is he who guards the Torah.
Yeah, it's really. I'm sorry. It's really interesting, like the idea of constraints. Just, I think a lot of people think negatively about this, and the word restraint is used, but like we thrive in creativity when we have constraints. Figuring out a workaround around something, is how most things in this world got discovered, invented, whatever. And so there's kind of an interesting aspect about that. Like there's something we were created to do that's just innate in us. And we need constraints in a lot of ways to do it well. And so the law gives those boundaries to really fulfill the vision for us. But I was thinking about the prophetic vision part, like where there's no prophetic vision, then people cast off restraint. And I'm thinking, well, there's nothing to even try to attain. There's nothing to try to conform to. There's nothing. And so we have situations now where we can see you can cast a vision and somebody can grow into that. We can, and it can be a positive one or a negative one. You can have a positive prophecy, or you can have a negative prophecy, and people can really grow into that. So those things matter, like whether they're good or bad, they matter, and they will shape and form people, or a people, even a group of people. But without it, there's nothing to even conform to. And it's just, I think that's a lot of what's happening when you don't get good oversight in parenting.
I think this whole idea of a prophetic vision, I was just looking up the word there, and it's really just a single word, chazon, and it's referring to an oracle or, supernatural vision, and not necessarily a vision where you see something, but, although that may be what it means, but I think prophetic vision really is a pretty good translation, even though it's just the one word. But the primary role of the prophets is primarily to call the people back to repentance. In part, they told the future, but they did so in order to provoke repentance. At the beginning of this, I had mentioned the prophecies towards the end of Deuteronomy, where Moses is warning the people, if you keep the commandments, you'll have all these blessings, and that's a prophecy. If the nation keeps all the commandments of God, they're going to be prosperous, they're going to be fruitful, they'll have peace, they'll defeat their enemies. But if they don't, these bad things are going to happen, and it's going to be a cascade of terrible things that happen if they continue to refuse to repent. And although prophecy does talk about the future and warn people that bad things are coming, or good things, the primary purpose is to bring people back to God. And so where there's no prophetic vision, where there's nobody calling the people back to God's instructions, they cast off restraint. What's holding them back? If God's commandments don't apply anymore, why should we care what God has to say?
You guys know what the word prophet means?
Hmm.
Because you're speaking with authority, right? So you're coming in the
Right.
authority of Yahweh with his word on your lips.
Yeah, I think, the way that the word is used in scripture, a prophet is someone who is relaying a message directly from God to the people. But in another sense, when we are repeating those prophecies, or when we are repeating truths, we are at the very least echoing the prophecy and we're acting as the proxies of the prophets.
So would you assess that the quote unquote Christian prophetic as giving some esoteric "thus saith God," which could be interpreted any way you want? Would you say that's prophetic? I don't. I personally don't believe that, but it's certainly
It's false prophets.
Yeah, I think that most of the time those people are just speaking whatever's coming into their head.
That'd be bad.
And it sounds like when you listen to it too. I mean, it's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute.
We'll even think of the theological episodes into eschatology propagated today by the dispensation. I can speak only to dispensation. Well, I can speak to anything I want, but I'm saying I know the dispensational eschatology and the disaster and the bait and switch going on, and the basically turning Yeshua into the anti-Messiah through bad interpretation, or through ignorance, or I'm sure at the beginning of the time that they developed it, perhaps consciously trying to deceive people. So those are bad fruits. Or the wolves by their fruit, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think we've got time to do one more. Is there another verse or another passage in here that somebody would like to talk about?
I found
coming up.
I found 21 interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, it's here, we don't have, well, most of us don't have servants, but in Honduras, where my family's from, the poverty there is so high that if you're like lower middle class, you can have a servant. So my parents, they had servants, but we were by far rich people, by far. But poverty is so bad over there that it doesn't take much for you to have a servant. But I remember that both of my one of my grandmothers, and she passed that on to her kids, was very much like that of don't pamper your servant at all. If they're there to have a job, you punch the clock and it is what it is. That's it. That was on my mom's side of the family. And my mom actually did the opposite of that. Now, thankfully, and it worked out for her. The ladies that she had working for her, they went out and actually ended up doing great things in life. They went and got an education. They went and had a family, raised children, and they were able to dig themselves out of poverty. But I think that my mom was wise to do that because I think she knew what kind of servants she had, and she rewarded that. Like she let them sit at the table with us to eat. Now, my other the rest of my family did not do that. They were like, "Look, you eat in separate from us. Like the servant will be in the kitchen eating, and they will be in the dining room table eating. It was completely separate. They'll have the little break room in the back and all this other stuff. But at the same time, I would see when sometimes the servants will take advantage of mistaking kindness for weakness and doing that. So I actually got to see this part of it in my life, and it's interesting that you still see that to this day. That's what I was telling you, like back from Mexico down and in other places, you still get to experience some of this and live some of the stuff that's written here that some of us can't really understand, because it's westernized, so I find that interesting.
It's definitely a foreign concept to most Americans, and we think we read something like this and our only concept of servants are either chattel slavery or employees. And both of those, we're thinking, well, if you have employees, well, you got to treat them nice. I mean, if you don't treat them well, they're going to quit, go somewhere else, or you're just going to be mean. And if you own people, well, that's just horrible. But American culture is so disconnected from all of human history. It's really a strange kind of place when you compare it to the rest of the world.
Yep. And no. And the thing about it is that, my, roles reversed. My mom was an educated woman. So is my dad. My dad's an engineer. My mom studied law. But once you come to this country, it doesn't matter. You're no longer an engineer. You're no longer a lawyer, right? So mom actually ended up being a servant here for other people. And thankfully, she was, I would say, treated fair. Not great, but treated fair. And I would like to think that's because she treated other fair, her servants fair, that she was treated fair as well. But there are some servants as well, like at the end of the day, we're all servants to a certain extent. I mean, I work for somebody, and I don't know if the word servant here, it's just, maybe it's different than worker. I'm not sure if it's.
Yeah, it probably refers to a slave.
Right.
But slave in, at least in biblical culture, would be different than what we think of.
Right. There's indentured servitude. That's what mostly they refer to here when they talk about slavery, at least for the Israelites, right? I don't care what people may think, but they actually did not believe in slavery. Indentured servitude, it was something else. But I don't know, maybe there was some kind of slavery when it came to their enemies, though, I think, right? When they went to battle and stuff like that.
A non-Hebrew could be owned, at least.
Right.
I mean, as much as anything can be owned in a godly culture.
But I think they had to be let go at some point, eventually, right after the 7 years or something like that.
Well, a Hebrew slave had to be let go in the 7th year. A non-Hebrew could be kept, but a good Hebrew master would be working to transform his slaves into Hebrews, and then he would have to let them go.
Exactly.
This really made me think of Abraham and Eliezer. And when Abraham is in his 90s and he still doesn't have a son, he's approaching his 90s, I think, before Ishmael was born, and he's pleading with God, what am I supposed to do? I'm old, Sarah's old, we don't have a son, and Eliezer, my chief servant, he's going to be my heir. And Eliezer was a loyal guy and apparently a good man, but he wasn't Abraham's son. And Abraham had treated him well, but he still maintained that distinction that the servants are servants, the sons are sons.
Yeah. And that's what I love about Proverbs. Like things that you think that have no there's so much knowledge and wisdom here that you really have to sit down and we read here at the household, we read one proverb every day. It's been like that for years. And every time we get something out of it, but it's really conversations like we're having now, Jay. And I'm kind of sad this coming to an end. And I was like, what Jay is going to do after, you don't have to answer this, but what Jay is going to do after Proverbs, man. I bet you if we recycle this again, we'll just keep learning and learning more of this stuff. But it's interesting because I saw this documentary about, I used to love wrestling in the early 90s as a kid, right? Now I understand it's complete junk and people shouldn't watch it.
No way.
So one of my
It's
favorite
fake?
That's funny.
one of my favorite ones was The Ultimate Warrior,
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a documentary about it, and it was great too, and blah blah blah. And Jim McMahon, right? He's the main guy, right? That owns all that. And he really was, Ultimate Warrior was really his indentured servant, right? He worked for him. And one of the things about the Ultimate Warrior, forgot his name, I wish I could remember right now. It starts with a J, I think, also I can't remember. But he didn't grow up with a father, I think, or his father was not a good guy or whatever. So they said that he was always looking for Tim McMahon as a father and as to get his approval.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad that a grown man is looking to another grown man for approval, but that's what he was doing. But at some point, the interviewer asked Jim, "Hey, listen, did you really see the Ultimate Warrior as your son?" And it looked like it was really hard for Jim to say this, but he said no. He said, "I have my own son." I said, "I definitely cared for him and everything like that." And you can tell that he was choked up when he was saying this a little bit. You can tell it was really hard because a lot of people say, he's like a son to me or whatever. But I think that is so serious. Like there's this distinction, and it's hard because I think that we've been religion or Christianity has made us a lot more softer than what we should be in many ways. And the reality is that that's your own blood. So there is a distinction if somebody's not your family member, is not your kid, and you have to put them first. And I've seen it where other people in the faith trying to do whatever it is in their mind, put somebody else like the congregation or other people in need before their wife and their children. And their wife and their children, they end up losing their wife. Their children end up not following the faith because he missed the point.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah,
you realize that God has his only son Yeshua, and he was the main thing for him. No one else, He didn't. Yeah, I understand that, you go after the other sheep, that, you leave the 99 and go to the other sheep. Yeah, that's understandable. But at the end of the day, you don't leave your family, you don't leave your own blood for that,
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think there are rare cases where God calls someone to do that. I mean, one case would be Peter. He did go out on these missionary journeys. And was eventually martyred for his faith, and he left his wife behind when he did it. Although we know that some of the apostles did take their wives on their missionary journeys with them because Paul says they did. But as far as we know, Peter was not one of them. he traveled with, with the other apostles, but with his wife at home.
Yeah,
And
I don't the concept when people say, "Oh, I found my tribe." In essence, I interpret it as they are forsaking their family for their friends or for those they have an affinity with, and that may be my interpretation, but that phrase rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, and I totally understand what people mean when they say that, and I relate to it. But yeah, it's a symptom of our broken families. If we really valued our family relationships, then that phrase probably would have never entered the English language.
Yeah, I think the way that it's used now, as people, because people lack a sense of identity these days, I think it's much more used in that way pretty loosely as a means of people finding an identity and kind of glomming onto that and having a place for themselves. But we know that our identity, our ultimate identity is in Christ, but that we do have, flesh and blood identity in our family. And it should be a really strong thing. And I know, coming from a Cajun culture, and where family's like super central, like I have a very different experience and perspective around my identity. And I always had a really strong sense of like where I came from and who I was and what that meant. Very different from a lot of people that I've met as I left my home and got out into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People always looking for a sense of belonging somewhere. And that's why it's important to be in the word and the scriptures, because it is our nature to want to go look for that. And if you are not filled by the word of God, you can easily be deceived by others that may mean well and may care, and you end up in the wrong place, not where you need to be. And I'll finish my spiel by saying this we're talking about this stuff. This is a great book. It's called The Hacking of the American Mind. I won't be able to see it. It's by Robert H. Lustig, MD. Great book, and it talks about how pretty much corporate America has brainwashed us to believe things that shouldn't be there. And he does have a few pages about God and stuff like that. He talks about contentment and happiness. That's pretty much what he's talking about. Happiness is pretty much a lie, and contentment is what it really strives for. And how he mentions religion, but I'm gonna say faith, right? Belief in the Father. It's what really gives us contentment, because contentment is still and it's lasting, while happiness is very short. But he ends in one of his sections here. He says, when you're part of something larger than yourself, whether united by religion or tribal origin or heritage or a worldview or a hobby or a common goal, you feel a greater sense of contentment. And I don't think in the scriptures you see the word happy very much or at all. But people struggling and just being content, which you don't want to do a lot of.
Well, belonging is a huge part of our identity, and that's a really important thing to just our overall well-being. We're getting way past our usual time, but bear with me for just a couple more minutes. There's something else I want to say about this verse 21, and this is not what I think Solomon meant by this verse, but there's another interpretation that I think God was planting an idea, and he guided Solomon and Hezekiah's men who compiled this to word this in such a way that it could be interpreted differently. Whoever pampers his servant from childhood will in the end find him his heir. Well, there's another place in scripture where a servant is turned into an heir, and it's a good thing. And this is where we are made to be sons of God, where once we were servants, now we are sons. Or once we were slaves, now we are sons. And it's not because God pampered us necessarily, but it's because he loved us so much that he was willing to send his only son to die for us. And that's way bigger than just pampering a servant. And because he was willing to do that, we can be moved from slaves where we are under the condemnation of the law because we can never completely live up to it under our own power. We can be moved over into the status of sons where we're free to keep the Father's commandments, not out of fear that we're going to be punished, but simply because we love him and we are his children. And this is a good way that a servant becomes an heir.